I was 17 and growing up in the Howell Park area of Evansville, Indiana. It was the summer of '97. I had just finished my junior year, was heading into my senior year. I was excited about starting college in the fall. It was like any other summer vacation, hanging out with friends, rocking out with Mike Sanders on the radio, partying, just having a good time, and enjoying what remained of our childhood. Little did I know, mine would end much sooner. I was working at Leo's Barbecue as kitchen help. It was my turn to work late with the cleanup, prep, etc. when the weirdness began. I was almost done for the night, just had to take the night's trash out. I went out the back door, dragging those heavy cans behind me, towards the dumpster and out in the back lot. The restaurant sat on the edge of the Howell Wetlands, the heavily wooded park and nature preserve on the west side of town. As I moved further out into the lot, I noticed the silence. The frogs weren't peeping, the crickets weren't chirping, just dead silence. I didn't think much of it and continued towards the tree line to dump the garbage and go home. I didn't make it another 10 feet when I felt as if I was being watched. You know that tingling you get in the base of your skull when you sense something is just off? You feel little spikes of adrenaline. I moved ahead faster to get my chore done and get out of here. I couldn't see anything past the overhead lamps that were situated around the back lot, and this whole situation was freaking me out. In my mind, I immediately went to a story I had heard about a werewolf sighting down in Dogtown, just a few miles down the road. I had dismissed it as BS, but now I wasn't so sure. I was almost to the dumpster when I heard a loud, inhuman screech, and something landed on top of the dumpster with a thud. It looked human, skinny, naked, and pink-skinned, but its eyes, those black, hollow eyes, they stared right through me, boring into my soul. I ran like hell, got to my car, and left. I have never returned to that place. A few weeks went by, and everything seemed to be normal. I'd almost convinced myself that I had just imagined the whole thing. And then I saw it again. I was walking home from the basketball courts after a long set of games with some of my friends. I turned down my street and was almost home when I heard that god-awful screech again. I looked around and located it. It was perched atop my neighbor's house across the street. It wasn't full dark yet, but very close to it. I could feel those black, lifeless eyes. Those eyes. On me again. I was terrified. I ran home and locked myself in my room. After several hours, I finally managed to fall asleep, only to be awakened by the sirens of fire engines. My neighbor's house, where I had seen the creature, had burnt to the foundations. There were no survivors. I didn't see it again for a long time, but a string of strange and tragic deaths began and continued through the year in my neighborhood. Although I didn't see him, I could feel his presence, that sense of dread and malice. I didn't sleep well anymore. I could hardly eat. When school started again, I went from a solid B student to D's and F's. I hardly did anything that year. My parents sent me to a shrink, put me on antidepressants. None of it helped. I didn't talk about what I'd seen or what I knew. I didn't want to be committed to a psych ward. That was the worst year of my life. That miserable school year finally came to an end and I graduated high school. My 18th birthday was just over a week away when I saw him again. I had just dosed myself with some sleep meds and crashed out hard. When I woke from a dead sleep to find it leaning over me, its black eyes staring into mine, I could feel its breath on my face. It smelled of despair. I just laid there, looking back into those dark pits of eyes. I didn't dare move, just lay there, motionless, hoping it would just go away. But it just continued to watch me until the sun started to come up. It finally left through my bedroom window. My 18th birthday came without incident, but I'd had enough. The day after, I drove over to the Marine Corps recruitment office and joined, with only one stipulation, that they took me for training as soon as possible. It didn't take very long, and I was away from free of this damn thing. I became a career soldier, saw combat in several deployments, saw the world, and tried not to think of what was back home. When I did return to Evansville to visit my parents, I refused to stay with them, always opting for a room all the way across town. It hurt me to do it. I loved them both dearly, but I was terrified, so I just stayed away. That was until my father passed. I flew home for the funeral and to comfort my mother. I tried to just get a room, but my mother put her foot down and was not having any of it. And after some tears and pleading from her, I opted to stay with her despite my uneasiness. A few days passed and I didn't see or feel anything until my last night there. I felt his presence just outside my window. I grabbed my .45 caliber pistol, my K-bar, and walked out the back door. It was crouching down on the top of the back fence, glaring at me. I glared back. I was more angry than afraid. I raised my pistol towards it. It leapt in the air towards me. I took careful aim and began firing off shots. I jumped out of the way as it crashed down right where I was standing only a few seconds earlier. The creature hit hard and laid there in a crumpled heap of flesh. Face down and bleeding from multiple wounds, its sickly pink skin had turned to a greenish gray hue. I could see at least 3 exit wounds on its back. I smiled inward to myself. Not bad for such a small target. The injuries leaked a black ichor. It reminded me of old motor oil. I dropped a spent mag from my .45 and fed a fresh one in and chambered a round. I used my booted foot to flip its body onto its back. Its face was slack and expressionless. Its mouth was agape. Its black eyes were beginning to glaze over. I took a deep breath. All I felt was elation. This nightmare was finally over. I flipped its motionless form to bird and spoke aloud. "D-E-D, dead, you evil motherfuck!" I had spoke too soon. Its dead doll eyes focused on me, and it let out a deafening scream. It took me by surprise. I managed one step back before it leapt to its feet and was on me in a flash. It grabbed my right wrist in a bone-crushing grip. The gun clattered uselessly to the ground. Its other hand went directly to my throat, clamping down hard. It picked me up off my feet and we began to move backwards. Its frail appearance belied incredible strength. I couldn't breathe. My vision swam. I futilely tried to break its iron grip on my throat. To no avail. I was going under. I was going to die. And then I remembered my K-bar. I fumbled with the sheath, hoping that I didn't drop it, knowing full well if I did, it was game over. I freed the weapon and used what strength I had left to plunge the blade as deep as I could into the creature's chest. It let out another high-pitched pain scream and threw me hard against the privacy fence. It would have knocked the wind out of me if I had any left. Sitting there, back against the fence, trying to breathe and not pass out as the stars danced in my vision, I watched the monster pull my knife from its chest and cast it aside. It then refocused its attention towards me. With as much speed as I could muster, I scrambled over to my discarded 1911. I pointed my weapon directly at the creature. It stopped in its tracks, giving me a look of disdain. I thumbed the hammer back and the creature seemed to realize what I was doing. It dropped to all fours, then tore out of there. I sat there for a few minutes trying to catch my breath. I could hear sirens off in the distance, getting closer, and I knew I had to make a choice. I could stay here and definitely go to jail, or I could follow it and maybe try to finish it off before the cops got me. It was an easy choice. I knew exactly where it was heading. It was heading back to the beginning, the start of all this bullshit all these years ago. Back to the wetlands where it would feel safe. I picked up the knife, slung the blackish blood off of it, resheathed it, went to the rental car, grabbed my mag light, and then I followed after it. As I moved down the street in pursuit, I could easily tell where it had been. Its black blood had splattered all over the sidewalks, but also several of my neighbors stood on their porches, dumbfounded, mouths agape and eyes wide. I had just made it into the tree line of the nature preserve when a police car rounded the corner, lights and sirens blaring. I hid behind a tree as they passed. It would only be a matter of time before they figured out where I'd went. It was time to move. I continued deeper into the forest. Once I felt I was out there far enough, I activated my flashlight and began looking for signs of the creature. The woods around me were deathly quiet. As I continued on, I began to have that feeling of being watched. I drew my 45 and checked and double checked to make sure that it was live and hot. I hadn't made it too much further when I heard the rustling of branches. I shined my flashlight all around, still not knowing exactly where the noise had come from. I had begun to look up when 3 black droplets landed on my face. Shining my light and aiming my gun up in the tree, it sat there perched, just watching me. Without aiming, I fired off several shots. But that damn thing was fast. It had managed to get out of the way before my bullets could do any damage. They harmlessly just struck tree limbs. There was more movement to the right and above me. It then dropped down, at least 10 feet from where I stood, and let out another one of those high-pitched screeches. I fired off my last 3 rounds, not hitting anything until the gun clicked. I fumbled for another mag, but he began to rush me, and I did the only thing I could do. I threw that big heavy 1911 right at him. It smacked him in his face and staggered him for a second. I didn't waste any time. I bolted. I ran hard and fast, crashing through the underbrush, ducking around tree branches and limbs. But in my desperate frenzy to escape, I lost my sense of direction and got lost. I came to a dead stop to catch my breath and try to figure out the best way out of here, when something grabbed me from behind. I turned to face my assailant, throwing a hard right cross right into its face. The punch barely phased as his hand slipped back up to my throat. But before it could close its grip, I headbutted it right where its nose should have been. I followed up with a knee to the groin, and then I managed to snake my leg behind its and push as hard as I could. We both hit the ground. It turned loose. I rolled over to my stomach, got to my feet, and ran like hell. Off in the distance, I could see blueberries and cherries as the cops were gearing up to come in after me. They were now my only hope. As I approached the tree line, I slowed down and raised my hands. They hadn't seen me yet, and I didn't want to get shot. I had just entered the clearing, left of the parking lot where the police were, when my feet were literally pulled out from underneath me. It began to yank me back into the woods, and I did the only thing I could do. I called out for help. Spotlights turned towards us. I could hear the footfalls of several men running our way. I heard one of the approaching cops say, "What the hell is that?" And then I laid there prone on my belly until the cacophony of gunfire ceased. When I heard one of the officers say, "Sir, sir, are you okay? Sir, sir, are you okay?" I replied, "Yes. Did you get him?" "Yeah, we got him." The cop helped me to my feet and informed me that the EMS was on its way. I told him I don't need medics. I walked back towards the tree line where the cops were in a semicircle. I needed to know for sure if this thing really was dead. The monster's mangled form lay sprawled on the forest floor. Its sludgy black blood now leaked from over a dozen wounds. As I got closer, its head moved towards me, and it started to move. The cop closest to it didn't hesitate. He put his boot on its chest, pinning it to the ground, and aimed his shotgun right into its face and pulled the trigger. Its head exploded like a melon, vaporized flesh and bone in an instant. Its body twitched and spasmed, and then went still. I spent the rest of the night answering questions, filling out statements, and then they let me go home. A few days passed. I was packing up and getting ready to leave when I heard a knock on my door. I answered the door to 2 detectives, Morton and Carlyle. We exchanged pleasantries and I invited them in. They had a few follow-up questions they wanted to ask. I recapped the whole story over the last 20 or so years. Detective Morton asked if I had ever tried to talk to anyone about that, my parents, my neighbors. All I could do was laugh. Who would have believed me? They also told me that they had searched the abandoned steel mill on the far end of the property, and they had found some very interesting things in the sub-basement. They asked if I would mind accompanying them to the derelict mill. I flat out refused. They didn't ask a reason why, and I didn't offer any. We shook hands and they left. A short time later, I heard the reports of gunfire and something that sounded like an all too familiar high pitched scream coming from the far end of the wetlands. I finished packing the car, kissed my mom goodbye, and put this town in rear view, hopefully forever.